we're going to have a look at fitting a twist lock. Now, if you've got the maxi pattern, you'll have instructions in the pattern for this. There are no instructions in the regular pattern for this, but I'm going to show you as part of the sew along. So this is the one that I did already with a small twist lock on it. Now this twist lock, let me just measure how big it is, because you don't want anything massive. It's about an inch, just over an inch in width, and just about a half an inch high, and that fits really nicely onto the flap of the regular. Because I'm going to do my twist lock, applying it is exactly the same regardless of which purse you're doing. Because I'm going to do it on a maxi, I've just picked out a slightly larger lock. The theory of putting it in is exactly the same. So let's look at your lock first of all. You have a front plate, you have two little screws, you have a back plate, and back plates often have this sort of pretty work on the outside. Don't be feeling that the shiny bit is the bit that you're going to see. This is the piece that you're going to see. If you look at a shop bought bag, often on the inside you get this kind of, it's quite pretty actually, it's quite sparkly, but I've got a couple of lights on because it's quite dark here today, and I want you to be able to see what I'm doing. So you have that part, and then you will have your twist part. Now this isn't a twist one, it's a flippy one, but it's exactly the same. You would just have that bit that goes across with your prongs at the back and a washer. Now the washers that you get with these things are generic. They're not designed for each specific piece of hardware. I've got a drawer full of bits of these things, some longer, some shorter. They'll send you one that's sort of appropriate, but it's not necessarily the right size. So you can see there that the prongs actually don't go through the two outside ones. They go through the two that are one in from the outside. So always bear in mind that your washer may not perfectly fit your hardware. Let's get that out of the way. What else are we going to need? We're going to need a few things. First of all, I like to use my chalk marker. I use a biro, just an ordinary pen. If you want to use a fix-on pen, then that's up to you. You need a little usually cross-bladed screwdriver, preferably magnetic, because these little screws are tiny, and once they've gone on the floor, you're never going to find them again. Now what I like to use are the leather cutting presses. Now some people use them with their big green presses. I just use them in the old-fashioned way, whack them with a hammer. Just going to grab my board. I need that as well. I'm just suddenly thinking on my feet about things that I might need. You're going to need a ruler to measure where you're going to actually put the thing, and you're going to need a hammer. Now, when I do the hammering, I'm actually going to stop the video because I'm doing this on my cutting table. Now, my cutting table is good and solid, but it's not solid enough for hammering, and it makes things bounce. Not only will the camera bounce, but the whole thing will bounce, so it doesn't feel secure, and it's not the ideal way to do it. You need to make sure when you're cutting holes or doing anything like this that you do it on a really good firm surface. This is the other thing that I like to use to make the holes. You can either use one of those, or you can just use one of the little punches that you literally have to whack the top with a hammer. Use what you've got. You don't need anything really specialist. I love these just because I'm really lazy and I just think they're really cool. If you haven't got any, they come in sets of usually, I think I got a set of about 30 different shapes. Some of the shapes I've never used because I've never found a twist lock or a lock that requires that shape, but I have actually used them for cutting holes in faux leather to do reverse applique, so they've been used for other things. They come in lots of different shapes, rectangles, circles, great for grommets, and all sorts of sort of tear shapes, all sorts of funny shapes, in fact. They're really cheap. I think it's about £7, something like that, from Amazon, and I've had these for years, and they haven't gone blunt. I'm not going to put my finger on the sharp end to show you how they haven't gone blunt, but you'll have to take my word for it. They just haven't. Worth investment. So if you haven't got any and you want some, Amazon, even eBay from China. You get sets of about 24 or 36. I think there's even a set of bigger ones, which just literally give you every shape you could ever need. I think they're great. Very, very useful for this. So I'm going to show you basically how I do this. If you've got a different way of doing it and you feel you want to carry on doing it your way, that's fine. I don't mind. It's all about what suits you. Right, so first of all, we're going to find the centre part of our flap. Now, I'm doing this on the maxi, so it's a bigger flap. And I'm marking it with my chalk marker. I use my chalk marker because I can use a wet finger and rub it off, or a baby wipe, or just a little damp cloth, or whatever you want to do to get rid of it. Fix-on pens. And we all love Fix-on pens, but there's a lot of controversy about the things. They say they come off with heat, or they come off with cold, or they come off with rubbing, or whatever, and they're all different. This one is removed by friction, and it's got a rubbery bit on the end that you just rub, but sometimes they come back. So do be aware that if you're going to draw with one of these anywhere where you might see that fabric at the end of your make, just be careful, because you'll be kicking yourself if you suddenly find you've got blue lines all over the show. So I've created a line down the middle so I know where I'm going centrally. I'm going to take my back plate and use it as a template. So I'm going to pop that on centrally, and I'm basically using my centre mark and my top stitching lines to mark where this, to eyeball where this is centrally. And I'm just going to mark the inside of that rectangle and the two holes. Now, some locks have got more holes than this. My lock's got 2 holes. The same principle will apply regardless of how many you've got. You need to mark the holes because in this instance, the holes need to be cut out. Now, bearing in mind, you've actually just drawn on the inside of this aperture on the back plate. If you were to cut directly on that line, the hole that you create will be too small. What you need to do is make sure that you cut slightly outside. And when I say slightly, I'm talking about a 1/16 of an inch. The hole needs to be the right size for this little lip on the front of the hardware to sit nicely inside. And if you see, if I put the 2 pieces together, you'll see that they are actually, the lip sits right inside of the inside edge of that rectangle on the back plate. So you need to make this rectangle just a touch bigger. Now, if you've got these, you can use them, you can position them, and you can then whack them with a hammer. If you've got not the right shape, you can kind of add a little bit, or take it and move them and cut a little bit each time, which I've done before now. If you haven't got those, then what you can do is you can take a craft knife. If you're really, really confident with a craft knife, use a ruler and a craft knife and cut out that rectangle. The other option, which I used to do before I had these, was I'd use a hole punch or whatever, and I'd make a hole in each of the corners of that rectangle that I'd marked. And then I'd use a pair of little tiny sharp sort of embroidery type scissors, these sort of things, and just cut between the holes very carefully. It doesn't have to be a perfect cut, because actually that cut will be hidden within the mechanism of the lock itself. But that's basically what you're going to do. You need to cut out that rectangle just a touch bigger than the rectangle that you've drawn, because the rectangle you've drawn is on the inside of this aperture. If you just cut that out, this lock will not fit. Simple as that. No lock will fit. You need to have your hole for your this part of your lock slightly larger, and this is the part that goes on the flap, and this is the same with any bag or any purse that has a flap that you're putting this sort of lock on. This bit, the bit with the hole, will go onto the flap, unless the designer's come up with something really clever. That's how it will work. So I'm just going to pause you so that I can make these holes. I can't do it while you're watching, simply because the camera will jump off the stand. Okay, I've cut my hole, and you can see I started off by cutting just a rectangle out, and I've had to trim off extra little bits, and loads of little bits in fact, just tiny bits at a time until I knew that my hole was big enough. So I'm going to turn my panel over. I'm going to take the front part, and that's the piece that's nice and shiny, and lay it shiny side down on my board. And this is an old chopping board. I always use this rather than my cutting mat, because I feel that doing it on my cutting mat's going to ruin my cutting mat. Now, let me just grab an awl. Let's find an awl. Where's my awl gone? That sounds really silly, doesn't it? My awl's gone. But I can't find one. That's bizarre. Right, here we are. So you can see, I hope you can see, that the edge of the that raised lip is actually sitting just within the aperture that I've made. I'm just going to push the faux leather down onto this piece of hardware, making sure that the edges are all kind of outside of the aperture. Once I'm happy, now if you want to, you can put a little bit of glue. That's really very much your call. I'll take the other half of my hardware and just line it up over the top. And this is the bit that, because I'm on camera, will probably go horribly wrong, because, you know, these things do happen. Take my screw, line it up so I've just got that screw just part the way in, so I can still move this, because if you screw it right in, I find that you can never get the second hole, never get the second one in. Now what I'm just going to do is I'm just going to use my awl. I've got a little bit of the cork appears to have been blocking the aperture where the screw needs to go. This is a lot easier if you've got dainty little hands. So that's my second screw. It's just, they're both in, but the whole thing isn't actually solid yet. Now I've never ever put glue underneath these. I know some people do. I've never felt the need to. I've never had one fall off. So once you've got both screws in situ, just tighten them up, turn your flap over and just check that everything is looking nice and straight, because sometimes things do move. I'm quite happy with that. So you can then give those screws their final turn, and that's that part of your hardware fully installed. So that's the flap part. Depending on what kind of hardware you've got, this will go in different places. It really depends on the style. However, I find the easiest way to do this is to actually just kind of close the purse. Now, if you've already made the internal parts, so your lining panel and your pockets and what have you, you can just slot them inside, pull the flap over, and you'll get a good idea of whereabouts it needs to go. First things first though, what we need is a marking that is actually going to give us our central mark. Now, I know how wide this is, so I'm just going to make that didn't come out. I'm not going to make a small mark, I'm just going to leave it invisible, so that's better, which gives me the centre point. I'm just going to fold this over. So I'm making sure that the two top edges are together. I'm going to fold it over, but I need to be sure that there's a gap between the two, because obviously I'm going to need a gap for, if I'm going to use a frame, then I want the frame clasp to stick out here. So it needs to be wide enough for the insides to fit in. If it's easier, you can leave it until you've made everything and put everything inside, or you can just do what I do and do this. So I just basically pull it apart so that the flap part just shows the front part there. it's difficult to give exact measurements because every piece of hardware is different. Now, what I need to do first is get my washer out. And I think I already double checked this, that the prongs will fit through the outside hole going in one. So basically in one from the outside. Makes perfect sense to me. Probably to nobody else though. So I'm just going to grab a craft knife because that's something else I didn't manage to grab before I started this. I'm not doing very well here, am I? There we go. One craft knife. What I often do is actually put the lock in, pull it over, and you get an idea then where the prongs will need to go, because the prongs will stick into your exterior fabric. You can then, holding on to that, oh, and I've made a terrible pig's ear of that. Let's try that again, shall we? Yep, that gives me, so I'm just going to literally mark where those two prongs touch the cork. I want to just make sure that they are perfectly level, because although I've made the marks, they may well not be level. There's the centre mark, that's what I was looking for. Yep, that's good. So I'm just gonna, basically I'm going to draw across where that central part is, where the centre is and the prongs are. Where's my... I put the washer down in a really safe place and now it's disappeared. How bizarre. Okay, can any of you ladies see a washer? Oh, there's the washer. So I'm going to take my washer, I'm going to place it centrally onto that mark that I've made. Now bearing in mind that I'm actually not using, count how many holes you've got, 1 2 3 4, 1 2 3 4, can't count, 5 6 7 8, 1 2 3 4, there's 9 on there. So the central hole on there will be the centre mark. Make sure that your template, your washer is nice and straight. Mark those two end lines. They should come to the exact same space as you put your little marks before, which is good, and they do, which is perfect. I'm happy. If you don't want to do the marks before, you just use the template, then that's fine. I find that if I double check everything, then I'm much more likely to get it right. So I'm just going to make cuts using a craft knife. Now I know a lot of people use seam rippers. That terrifies me. I'm using a sharp craft knife. And I'm just going to pop the hardware through from the right side to the wrong side, pushing it right in, making sure that it's properly in. Now I'm using really stiff buckram in this, so I don't need any additional stabiliser. If you're using something like Decaville, then actually another little bit of Decaville or a bit of Peltex or something like that over the top of those prongs before you put your washer on will just give it just a little bit more stabilisation, make it more stable. There you go. I'm pressing the prongs outwards rather than into the middle, and the reason we do that is because if you push them into the middle, it creates a lump in the middle, which will then rub against the back of your lining panel, which we don't want. So we're then going to look for the duct tape, which has also disappeared. Oh my god, I'm so organised. So to try and avoid any rubbing, we're just going to put a piece of duct tape, it doesn't have to be pretty, this won't show, over the top of those prongs, which will stop any of those sharp edges rubbing against the lining part of your purse. So there we have the second half fitted. I can bring that over. And doesn't that look super? Really chuffed with that. Really pleased. I love it because it matches the silver. Now, I also got out another little lock. This one is a turn lock, but it's one of those that fits on the end of your flap. Now, let me see if I can find one that hasn't got too much on the... No, that's not going to work. Okay. It's just, this has got a magnetic clasp on it, but this one has two little screws, and I'll undo them and show you how this works, because this is a twist lock, but it's a twist lock that fits in a different way. So you do need to be aware that every lock will have its own set of interesting sort of way of fitting. So this is your back plate, this is your front. And what we would do with this is on the back of our flap, bear in mind this has already got a magnet on it, is you would put this plate centrally right up against the bottom edge, and you would mark the holes the same as we did just now. You would cut the holes, including those two small ones. And once you've done that, you would then fit this onto the front with the bottom lip overlapping the bottom of your flap. This actually doesn't fit particularly well on this flap, it has to be said. Then you would turn your work over, place your backing plate on, and fit your screws, and that would be that part done. And you'd have to do exactly the same with the second part. Once you'd got the first part on, you'd have to measure, use your hardware to measure exactly where the second part's going to go, keeping in mind that your purse is going to have filling in it, it's going to have insides in it. So you need to make sure that you don't fit the second half with the two top edges literally butted up together. So if you put them right together, that's not going to work. So that's that bit. And I think that is all I needed to show you with regard to twist locks, or in this case it's a flip lock, but twist lock, flip lock makes not a lot of difference. So that's, if you wanted to fit one of those to your Persephone, then as I say, this is just over an inch wide and just over a half an inch high. Anything bigger, and it's going to look a little bit out of proportion, I would say. You could try one of the little oval shaped ones, that would work as long as it wasn't too high. The thing to do is to kind of interview them, say by putting the front piece onto here and just seeing how it sits within that panel. I often do that. I'll get bits of hardware out and I'll sort of go, I'll try that one on there, see if it looks proportionate, because sometimes things don't look proportionate. You can see the bigger one looks great on that wider flapper on the maxi, and actually the little one looks really silly on the maxi because it's just not proportionate. So it's about finding what looks right and what feels right. It's really hard to give you exact measurements for any of these bits of hardware because they are all slightly different. I can give you the measurements that I used for the pieces that I use, but a lot of it is about fitting one part and then using your common sense and your knowledge of how the purse is going to come together to fit the second part. Easiest way is definitely to have made all the lining panel, to have made your pocket panels, to have folded those together and then just literally position them inside of the purse so that you can get a feel for how thick it is. Some of that will also depend on how thick your fabric is that you're using for your interior. So if you're using something that's really thin, the purse will be narrower. If you're using something that's quite thick, if you decided you were going to use perhaps, I don't know, tweed or something more, a cotton drill or something like that, even different stabilizer and interfacing can make a difference to how thick this purse looks at the end. So fit your insides in and then pull that over. What you don't want is for this to be too tight. If it's too tight, so if I take that out a minute, and if that lock was further down, you could probably move it down by about 1/4 of an inch and it actually would be okay. But the trouble is, once you put anything in this purse, it needs to have a little bit of expansion room to be able to put things in it. This is an empty purse. You know, if you want to put coins and stuff like that in it, then you're going to need a bit of expansion. So there we go, twist locks.